In our church, small groups meet on a weekly basis. But what's the meaning of that meeting, and what is the point of us getting together? So, what determines whether that meeting was a success? This is part 2 of our series and talking about leading a small group. And we're going to talk about how to make your small group meeting a success. We're going to talk mostly today about the night or the day or whatever it is that your small group meets and how to make that a success. My name is John Glinsky, and I'm joined today by my good friend Mike Roosh.
Hello, everybody.
Glad to have you here again, bro.
Good to be here.
Appreciate your feedback last time and helping to make this into a lively discussion rather than just me talking to a camera. So let's go ahead and start off with a question, Mike. I wanted to ask, what was it like the first time you went to a small group? As a visitor, not a member, what was it like?
I actually have 2 different experiences going to a small group. My first one was I was reached out to by some singles. I was married at the time, and so I went to this small group, and I do remember I don't remember anything about what was actually spoken, but I do remember the feeling that I had when I was there, and that was the people were extremely welcoming. They took me in. They made me feel at ease. They were extremely excited about me being there. I do remember that. Honestly, it's kind of a whirlwind. Like, I don't remember much more than that other than just this sense of feeling like I belonged. And what I found was so interesting was within maybe a week or 2 later, I attended a married small group and got the exact same feeling. And so I knew it was very impactful for me early in my spiritual life because I could see that there was something different about just the way that these people were and just how inviting they were. And I think, my religious experience up to that point was very standoffish. And so here was going into somebody's house that I didn't know and surrounded by people I didn't know and not knowing much about the Bible and just feeling uneasy. And a lot of that was just removed simply by the actions of the people that were there. And so it was really impactful. I mean, it made a big difference in the beginning and formation of my spiritual life. And I'm forever grateful for that. What was your experience like, John?
That's a good question. My first small group was in campus, and we called it a Bible talk. And if we end up mixing those 2 terms up, then you'll have to forgive us and just know that that's kind of what we're talking about. But we called it a Bible talk. It was very outreach focused, and so like I wasn't the only other visitor there, but you could tell who the regulars were. Similar to you, like it was very warm. I actually remember thinking to myself, "Oh, this is what church is supposed to be like," because I'd kind of grown up around church and occasionally going to church, and it wasn't that. Like the ones that I went to where I was more regular, where my family went, like we knew people and we would talk to those people, but I didn't feel like if I was a visitor there, I was pretty sure I wouldn't have felt that same warmth. But I do remember that feeling of sitting down, talking about the Bible, and like it just helped to be able to be real and talking with those people because I felt welcome,
Yeah,
so.
absolutely. Sounds like we had a very similar experience in that degree.
Agreed. So
what do you hope to accomplish by having the small group meeting the night? What do you hope to accomplish?
Okay. I mean, that's a good question because we kind of want to answer that question for people, right? Like, what does the success look like? I would say that the one thing I would say it's not is to have flawless execution. Like everything's rehearsed, everything's just in order. I mean, if everything works out great, then that's great. But I would say a success is more, do people feel welcome? Did you get a chance to encourage somebody? Did you feel encouraged while you were there? Did everybody feel welcome? Was the group connected? I think that's something that's a good metric for whether your small group meeting is a success. And I know even sometimes we're trying to get through various books together as a small group or maybe as a church, or we're trying to cover certain topics, and there's this desire to try to keep up and be like, oh, we got to stay on this pace every week. But I would even say that is less important than just addressing whatever's going on in the group. Like, because sometimes people are just having a rough week and just be like, you know what? If we just need to talk about how our week's going, pray together, do something like that, then, call an audible and do that. But I would say a success for me was the group there? Was it warm? Did we talk about God? Did we help each other out? I think that's what I'm looking for. So.
Yeah, I share in that. I think when I think of the times where I feel like I've walked away as a leader, successful in our group, were the times where we had deeper conversations that maybe wasn't surfacey. The lessons that we talk about in our small group are important, and I feel like it's useful to carry me, from week to week, and to keep that fire burning within me, and feeling connected with the people in the group. But I also feel like at the same time, there's circumstances in your life that come up where you need to be around disciples and be able to open and share what your struggles are, and this provides a great opportunity for that.
Yeah.
Coming in, and it's interesting, as we were talking a little bit before we started filming. You reminded me of kind of this, like, two different perspectives of a small group, and one is when you're the new person coming in, and then another one is the new person leading the group. And they both share similar qualities, I think. When I look back and I think about being new in a small group, I think about, like, feelings of nervousness, feelings of, am I going to be accepted? What if I don't have a huge biblical base of knowledge to work from in the discussion? What do I even have to offer in this discussion? When you're sitting around people that maybe have been around the kingdom longer, that have, studied the Bible more, and sometimes you can feel inadequate in that. And what's interesting is that those are some of the same feelings I felt when I was first leading a Bible talk, or small group Bible talk, discussion group,
Right.
whatever you want, family group. They're all the same thing in my mind. I like the term family group because to me it has deeper meaning, a sense of family connectedness there. And so, but those feelings that I had when I was new as just a member of the small group were very similar to when I was then leading a small group, in terms of, like, feeling anxious, feeling like, man, what if one of these older people in my group or somebody who's been around longer asked me a question I don't have an answer for. Like, I
Right.
felt like maybe this weight of, like, oh, you're supposed to have an answer for anything, when that's not the truth.
So then what do you do in that situation? If somebody asks you a question and you're the small group leader and you don't know the answer, I mean, it sounds like you've been around a while. You've probably been asked questions you don't know the answer to.
Sure.
What do you do?
Sure, and I still am to this very day.
Right.
I think humility goes a long way.
Yeah.
I think it's simple just to say, hey, I don't know the answer to that, or even turn it to the group.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I found is a powerful tool, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about the nuts and bolts of leading the discussion. But is turn it to the group. I mean, that's what you're all there for, to help iron sharpening iron. And so I don't go into the groups that I've led thinking that I'm the end all be all and that I've arrived. I actually go there feeling the opposite, and it's helped me tremendously just to be humble, and because the members of my group, they're amazing people, and I want to learn from them and to collectively go to the Word and find out those answers. And that's the other thing too. Like, I mean, how do you handle that when you get a tough question?
It's pretty similar to you. I mean, my wife actually is always just kind of going like, how do you even know this? I know lots of random stuff. It's because, like, I'm a curious person, so I go look stuff up. And so, like, that's what I'll do when people ask me a question. I'll be like, that's a good question. I don't really know that. Let me go look it up. And like, usually we don't do it right there during small group, but I'll say, like, hey, come back next week, or let's talk, and I'll go see if we can find some scriptures and see what else what other resources we have to help answer that question. But like you said, I think that's actually very shrewd to throw it out to the group and be like, hey, what do you guys think? And like, learn from each other. I think that's a great thing to do in a small group, is just to let everybody participate and not feel like you as a leader either A, have to have all the right answers, or B, that you are like the gatekeeper of truth or something like that, that like all the answers have to come from you. So I think that's cool. Actually, that would build a good sense of community, I think, in a small group. So then, all right, let's talk about preparing for the night of.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to push talking about the lesson. Like, we're gonna talk about how to prepare a good small group lesson in part 4 of this series. But let's just talk about the other stuff. Like, when I say, hey, Mike, let's say you've got a lesson ready to go, or somebody sent, Dave sometimes sends out notes or something. If I say, hey, Mike, you're hosting small group this Friday, what are you going to do? Like, what are the things that you tend to prepare for a small group?
So my first thought is prior preparation prevents poor performance. That's just an acronym I take at work, and so it carries over kind of into this aspect of my life. And
That's the acronym PPPPP.
Yeah, there's another version of it that I don't want to
sure.
give here, but it's the same. It sums up the same idea.
Didn't mean to open that wormhole.
But for me, obviously, if there's two different styles of the lesson. One is that it's prepared for you, and then the other one is you're preparing it, right?
Right.
And so, for me, the sooner that I can start to think about those things and prepare questions in my mind, the better off I am personally. I personally don't do well like jumping in just raw. Like I have to think about what the flow of the lesson's going to be.
Right.
At least look it over once, twice, several times. And for me, what I'll do is I'll look at that sometimes that morning in my quiet time. That'll be my quiet time. It's just me looking over those notes, kind of preparing my mind, and then I can reflect on it throughout the day, leading up to opening our house and having people over, leading the discussion.
Cool. I think you said something good there. In a sense, just playing to your strengths, like that you're good with something that you're well versed in, you're well prepared. I actually am one that I'm a little bit more like I prefer to just kind of be nimble on my feet and pivot. And so if you tell me to go, hey, go write a large series of small group lessons, I'm just going to sit there and stare at a blank piece of paper for a long time. But if you're like,
right.
Hey, everybody's going to show up at your house on Wednesday, and like each week I'd be like, here's what I want to talk about. I think it would work out pretty well, but that's my strength. And I know that that's not necessary for everybody. And I think it's important for people to know that you don't have to be the same kind of small group leader that maybe you learned from, or
right.
that you think this is the ideal small group leader. Play to your strengths. Do what you do well.
Absolutely.
And do that. So go
well,
ahead.
I do want to piggyback off that, and that is, if I could go back and analyze week to week, a week where I felt very prepared versus a week where I felt very unprepared, the reality is the outcome on the receiving end probably didn't feel any different.
Right.
Because the word is the word.
Yeah.
Right. And God's Spirit moves in people, whether you're prepared or not. He wants to move in the hearts of people.
Yeah.
So I have to think about that. It's actually comforting, right?
It is.
And it almost gives me a little bit of an out on those weeks where I'm like, man, I got, I'm staying late at work, or my kids, acting up, or I'm dealing with other issues, things that are happening. Big love to my daughter, Allie. I didn't mean to throw you under the bus there. But, if things are happening in my life where maybe I don't get that prep that I would normally put in, the outcome is still usually the same. And that is people coming in, feeling welcomed, discussing the word, getting strengthened, and moving forward, right? Fanning the flame. So that's what I my takeaway from preparing, not preparing. It's so interesting. That's why I think we complement each other so well as friends, is that, we're different. We're very different in our makeup.
And I would even say, like, that as you play to your strengths, that what you were saying there is, like, the receiving end of it doesn't necessarily, the people that were in the small group probably didn't know the difference between a week that you were super prepared and a week that you were not that prepared. And some of that is just like, hey, give glory to God, like His Word does all the work. But I think some of that is a lesson for us that as a small group leader, you're not that important. And I say that meanly, but I also say that like in a way to maybe take some of the responsibility off your shoulders and just say, what does a small group need? It needs the group. It doesn't need a leader. It needs the group to be successful. And so what can the leader do? It's another role in the body. It's another piece of the puzzle doesn't necessarily make it the most important part of the puzzle. It just means that's just the person that's kind of like, hey, here's what we're doing and how we're doing it. And a good leader will also source that information from their group and be like, what do you guys want to do? Is this working for y'all? But in the end, what people want out of that is going to be more along the lines of just they want the fellowship. They want to be able to talk about it. There's been times I literally have had a small group on a Friday, and I work from home, and I'm just like blitzing, and 6 or 6:30 comes, and I'm just finishing work, and I step out, and Carol's like, oh yeah, everybody's coming over here in 30 minutes, and I'm like, oh, I don't even have anything prepared, and like for me, it was a big, it didn't happen that often, but there were some times that did happen, and I think even just kind of going and being like, well, what have I read in my quiet time recently, or what are some of my favorite scriptures? That's cool too. Other times it's just like, starting with, hey, how's everybody's week doing? Or
Right.
does anybody want to share a scripture?
Good
Just even just
icebreaker.
throwing it out there and being like, guys, we can, like, they can lead their own small group if you just start asking some questions and
Exactly.
making it work.
One thing that I wanted to also add that came to my mind was that the power of prayer. I do. It is very regular for me as the time approaches. That's when I start to feel maybe a little bit of anxiety. Like, hey, there's going to be people coming into the house. I want to show hospitality, but just getting a few moments to pray definitely helps to ease some of the anxiety. It's like, hey, I'm just laying this at your feet, God. Please bless this time.
Yeah.
Use me as your tool to help sharpen these disciples, and we'll all grow together, And so I definitely leaning on God like that, I think, is helpful for me to just kind of reduce my fears and anxieties. Those of you that don't know me very well, I'm a firefighter by trade, and the toughest part of my job as a firefighter is really the drive to the call. It's that moment where you're just waiting because you don't know what to expect until you get there. And it's the same in like leading Bible talk. It's that wait until the first person arrives. Once the first person arrives, the rest is
Then
done.
it's just-
The rest it's easier, right?
Yeah.
But that prayer time is really important because you connect with God and you can lay it at His feet, right? And
Yeah. So let's circle back around. I mean, because we've taken a little bit of time here to talk about, hey, you don't need to stress about the preparation. God's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. The group's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. But you shouldn't just be like, okay, well, cool, I don't have to do anything.
Right, yeah.
So let's kind of run down what are some of the other things that you can do to prepare. So you talked about knowing the material. You also talked about praying ahead of time. I mean, at this point, I haven't added anything to this discussion. It's all been the Mike Roos show. But no, I think that's great. I would also, the one thing I would throw out there is just having a warm environment. And that's kind of multifaceted in the sense that you want to have people feel that feeling that you had when you first showed up, or that I had, where they feel welcome. And some of that's preparation too, just making sure that you're going to be that way. And sometimes that means that you need to have a prayer before they show up. But other times it's also like, if you're having them over to your house, is your house basically clean?
absolutely.
I mean, like if you show up to my house on a random day, there's a good chance it's not going to be that clean. But it's not going to be terribly dirty, so it doesn't take too much to clean it up. But then also, like, is the TV on? Is there other stuff? Do they feel like they can come in and it's a relaxing place? So like I will sometimes put on music. Sometimes we definitely make sure the house is clean before people come over. But definitely turn off the TV and make people feel like they are the ones that you're focused on while you're there.
Do you offer food?
So that's a good question about food. It's going to actually depend on what your small group looks like. When we were in campus, it was, we rotated responsibility. Somebody brought a bag of Cheetos or something, right? And maybe some drinks to share. But now that we're at my house, we actually have a small group that's mostly young marrieds, people with either no kids or little kids. And we do Wednesday night because that works for everybody. And we were going to just do 7:30 start in the small group, but almost every time people rushing in with, some sort of bag of fast food, just trying to make it there on time. So we decided, let's just do it differently. Let's just say 6:30, the doors are open. We're going to have some food. And we use GroupMe to throw out there, hey, here's what we're making tonight. If you guys want to bring a side, you want to bring a dessert, you want to bring a drink, then people will just reply, I'm bringing drinks, or I'm bringing this or that. And, if people don't bring stuff, then we have water. That's fine. People drink water. And, usually the meal is there to satisfy everybody, but just sitting around and eating a meal together is so much of a family builder. It's just, it brings things together. And that way, usually everybody eats, then like we clear the table, people sometimes offer to like help with the dishes, and we usually just kind of give them a quick rinse, throw them in the dishwasher, and then we're like, all right, guys, let's go. And we sit there at the dinner table and have we open up the Bible and have our small group talk. And I love that. I feel like that's a great thing, but it's not going to work for everybody's small group.
Right.
So if you can do food, totally do food.
Okay.
Even if it's just like a snack of some sort. But make sure that if the finances or whatever is a consideration, to do whatever considerations you got to on that.
So if I'm hearing you right, maybe a good start point is just to assess the people that are in the group,
Yes.
see what the needs are,
Yeah.
and then maybe set up a plan based on what you got, right? Like,
yeah, and like I said, I mean, I'm trying to balance this a little bit for people that are new to leading a small group, might already be intimidated just by the idea of leading a small group. So again, this doesn't have to be you doing that. You can totally just say, like, first small group, no snacks, and then people are there, be like, hey guys, would y'all
There
like to
you
have snacks
go.
here every week?
Yeah.
Can somebody take responsibility for that? Just pass it off to somebody and make it happen. But yeah, like the practicals, like at our house, we try to, if the kids are back from their extracurriculars, we're like, hey, somebody go clean the bathroom, somebody take the trash out,
There you
know,
go. Okay.
somebody run the vacuum cleaner through the living room. And it takes like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of prep work to clean up the house. But just making sure that when people come in, that the house isn't a distraction.
I will say that's a hidden benefit to leading a small group is that's the one day of the week that we collectively clean our house.
Right.
It's kind of built in, and hey, it looks good, right? Makes
Yeah.
it feel good.
Yeah. So yeah, any other practical thoughts on preparing for small group night?
So I personally have a big, giant, loving mutt that will get in people's faces,
I know
and so
Rocky.
not everyone necessarily loves my big stinky mutt. So I do try to put him up in his kennel, and then once people arrive and then kind of get into the flow, I do ask, hey, are you comfortable with me letting him out? Because he just likes to wander, and I think it adds another layer of family home life to
Yep.
the group. And they all know him. They all like to pet him. I'm sure they don't like his giant tongue and bad breath on them, but I definitely ask the group if that's okay with them because maybe somebody has an allergy or somebody just doesn't want dog slobber all over them. So
Yeah.
I try to respect that and making the environment in our house like welcoming and open.
No, that's good. Yeah, I have a similar situation, and there's been times I haven't thought about that. Somebody new shows up, and all of a sudden my dog's like greeting them. And they're like, I hate dogs, or like they're afraid of dogs or whatever. And so you're right. It's good to think about those things. If you have the same people coming over every week, you kind of start to learn whether you need to do that kind of stuff. But being considerate of those that are coming over is very important. And I think it's a principle of leading a small group is knowing who's in your small group and knowing those people. What do they know? What do they like? I mean, if having a meal together works, have a meal together. If it's not going to work because of people's lifestyles or pace of life, then so what? That's okay.
Yeah, I think those are some really good practicals. I do have a question for you because I've had this happen in my group. That is when we'll share a meal together or share food together, and then there comes a point where you want to transition to the talk. And it's hard. Sometimes it can feel like herding cats. How
Yeah.
do you typically bring your group together?
Good question. I think this is actually where I rely on my teen ministry experience of just embracing awkwardness, and I literally, like, people will be having different discussions and stuff, and I'll just be like, hey guys, we're about to wrap this up and we're going to get into,
Just
we're going to get
announce
into the
it.
word. I just
Just go with
announce it. And I
announcement.
just and people are like in the middle of stuff, and usually people are quick to be like, oh, okay. But I mean, you can sometimes, like, you can find a connector for that to just be like, hey, anybody want dessert, or just kind of something to throw it out there. But you don't have to be super skilled. Just come out and be like, all right, guys. So, like, literally right now, like I said, we do 6:30 to about 7:30. We have a meal, and people arrive at various times during that time. But come 7:30, I start cleaning off the table, or somebody starts cleaning off the table, and I'll be like, all right, guys, it's about 7:30. We're gonna transition now into our small group talk. And sometimes it's a nice, easy transition. Other times it just feels like super robotic, but you just got to do it.
It makes it happen.
So,
It seems like we're kind of transitioning our conversation maybe to like expectations amongst the group.
yeah.
How do you lay out expectations to your group members?
That's a good question. I think actually when our group was more outward focused or outreach focused, I should say, like when I was in campus and we constantly had new people coming in every week, like that's something we talked about prior to even the first one was like, hey guys, here's how to, be mindful of newcomers whenever you're at the group. Make sure everybody feels welcome. Don't just talk to your friends, like simple courtesy things. We're not talking like rocket science. It's just like, hey, make sure you're prepared for this. But now that like we lead a married small group and we have a new couple that'll come in once every month or two, but it's not like every time there's somebody new. So in general, what I do is usually at the beginning of a season, especially like at the end of the summer, we've done summer midweeks. And so then now we're finally getting back into small groups or just, after Christmas, then I usually kind of have one talk where like, hey guys, here's our expectations for the group. What's y'all's expectations for the group? And just have a talk with the group. That way everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I want people to feel is that the small group needs to be small. And so we should have an outward focus where we're bringing new people in. But what that means is that when we get too big, we're going to have to split. And so you you have to walk that balance of, build family, build some great relationships, but know that at some point you're going to have to move. Otherwise, your small group is going to cease to function the way that it's supposed to, because it's just going to be too big. And not everybody's going to be able to share, and then you're not going to notice when people aren't there. And, it's just like everything that comes from just a small size that's good is going to get lost as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're holding on to this. Oh, these are all my friends. And then you start to go, well, I mean, can you really be great friends with 13 other couples? I have my doubts with that. But so then sometimes there's a little bit of give and go. There's nobody that I don't want in my small group, but we set that expectation early on. Like we're gonna be outward focused. We're gonna invite people in, but that means we're gonna grow and then we're gonna split. But in the meantime, while we're here, I want you guys to feel welcome and to be able to share vulnerably. But I'm going to do my best to keep that environment safe for that. And I'd like for y'all to do that too. And then people share like, oh yeah, I love this, or I want this out of the small group. And I think all that's great, just for everybody to talk about it and to have those expectations as a group discussion. That way it's not like you feel like you have to orchestrate it, or you have to prepare people and be like, oh, hey, I've got a visitor coming over, so you can't wear that shirt, or, like stuff like that.
Yeah. I think you're smart, and I've never thought of asking the group like what are their expectations from the group, but I feel like that can create some buy-in.
Oh, absolutely.
On there, because then if they feel like they've had input on it, then they definitely own it, and then it becomes weird for them not to be a part or show up or whatever. They're not holding up their part of the bargain, really.
Yeah.
Because we have to rely on each other in a family. We do that, right? So why would it be any different in the group?
Yeah. I mean, it's honestly, it's kind of family dynamics, just in how the small group works. But it's because it's relationships, and with any relationship, one of the things that I find that causes bumps and rifts in any relationship is either miscommunication or mismatched expectation. And so if we can just kind of lay it all out there and understand what everybody's coming to the table with, either with what they need or what they're hoping to give, then everybody is on the same page, So that way there's not like, oh, why do we always talk about Jesus? It's like, well, this is a church small group. This is why we're going to talk about Jesus, So.
Very good.
Yeah. All right. So one last subject I wanted to kind of throw out there is leading the discussion. Have you ever had a discussion that just feels flat? Like when you're trying to have a small group and it just feels like you're the only one talking, or it just doesn't land the way that you want it to?
Yeah, I've noticed that sometimes I'll ask a question and I won't get any response, and it's almost like did I start to question did they not understand what I meant, or is this a bad question? Is it they have no point of reference to speak from? What is the holdup here? Because you want to bring out this discussion, but for whatever reason it's not happening. And I can see as a leader, I felt it where I'm kind of pulling my little hair that I have, going, man, this isn't a discussion.
Right.
And what advice do you have when you're in that situation?
It's a good idea, honestly, for you to kind of go through that thought process, because sometimes it's just various things. Sometimes it's because you asked a question and nobody has any frame of reference for. Other times it's because you asked a great question and everybody's thinking about it. And so for me, whenever I ask a question and I don't get much of a response, then I'll usually wait a little bit. Like, again, I kind of embrace the awkward side of things. I just let people think about it. And if, like, I kind of have a sense for, like, if it's been a really awkward long silence, then I kind of go, okay, do you guys understand the question? Or I'll either rephrase it, or sometimes I'll just break it down and try to go with, okay, let's ask a simpler question. Like, instead of saying, like, what are your thoughts on God? You can kind of come back and say, okay, well, let's just start with, when did you guys, or what do you guys believe, or do you believe in God? Start with a very simple question. People will go, yes. Okay. So then, do you believe that God is good? And then people will say yes. And then you can ask, well, why do you believe God is good? And then that'll get the ball rolling and something like that. And that's rather than saying like, what are your thoughts on God, which is a great open-ended question on some level. It's different than being like, you read a scripture of Jesus walking on water and you look at people and be like, all right, so what happened in this story? What did Jesus do? And they're like, he walked on water. Like, okay, cool. Next verse. That's not a great discussion either, because everybody's participating, but you didn't really get people involved. So I like to ask open-ended questions that allow people to talk, but usually you have to start with some simple, direct questions that are like yes, no,
Lead up.
yeah, that lead up to it.
Icebreaker.
No, well, you can totally do an icebreaker, but I guess what I'm, and this is kind of an icebreaker, but even something like if we're going to talk about Jesus walking on water and that situation with Peter where he pulls him out of the boat and Peter's, believes for a little bit and then starts to sink. Let's just say, like, you could say, like, hey, what happened in this story? Right? That's a pretty open-ended question, and people will be like, oh, well, Jesus walked on water, and oh, well, Peter walked on water, and like, oh, no, he didn't, and then like people start talking a little bit. That's great, but then you kind of want to bring it in. Like, that was an open-ended question. If you ask it, nobody answers, and you go, okay, what was Jesus doing? And he was walking on water. What were the disciples doing? They were screaming for their lives. And what was Peter doing? You kind of walk them through that, and then you can kind of say, well, was Peter faithful in this story? And that's a nice open-ended question, because a part of the story, yes, and that part of the story, no. And so then people can talk about that and go back and forth. But it was more than just like that's I would say is like step one is talking about the concept. But then step two would be to ask another open-ended question that's personal. And what I mean by that is something that's going to connect with people and that is going to test their vulnerability to some extent, because that's what bonds a small group. If you're just talking about events and stuff, nobody's going to really feel that close. Right. But if you go, okay, was there a time in your life where you started out doing something faithful and got halfway into it and freaked out? Yeah, and people would be like, I don't know. That's a question where I would just be like, I think to myself, that was a nice blunt question. People know what I'm talking about, but it's going to take them a while to come up with an answer.
I got you.
And so then that's when I would just embrace the awkward silence.
Do you call people out?
Sometimes.
I mean, not in an accusatory way, but what I'm saying is sometimes you have to
say, like, hey, what do you think? I totally would, but I wouldn't do that to somebody I don't have a good relationship with. So at least not like, what was the time in your life where you felt like you were unfaithful? And then like pick on somebody I don't know. Like that'd be a pretty rough question. Yeah. But if we're talking like icebreaker questions or like, hey, what did you see Jesus doing in this story? Or, something that they can just kind of look at. I might ask somebody that's not talking that they've been around much. So
pull people in. Sometimes I think that you kind of need to prod people a little bit just to get them going, and so that they can feel comfortable in the group. Yeah. By sharing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. If they're not already participating, it'd be good for you to try to call them by name, but in a friendly way. Like, you want to try to create that safe space for them to feel like I can talk here in this group, which is why I was saying, like, don't start with them for like the deep dark question, but start with them with tee them up a nice easy answer, and then just ask them to share something that you think most people would be comfortable sharing, and then that gets the discussion going. So
I think it's really practical and makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So with that, basically, I think those are the main things that I like to do is you have some of that talk with that expectation talk at the beginning of the season that I was talking about. So that way everybody in the group knows, hey, we're here to talk to each other, to be vulnerable. And so that way those that are like kind of outsiders or maybe newcomers to the group, they see that there's this warmth in the group and that it's safe to share. And hopefully we can exemplify that to somebody who's new to the group. But that way it's not just me. So the other thing I would say is, as a leader, I do feel responsible with, if I ask a question that requires vulnerability, something like, hey, what was the time that you feel like you failed? Or something like things that people don't feel that comfortable sharing. That's what connects people. But if nobody's sharing, then I'll say, okay, well, here's a time in my life where I felt like it. And then, especially being in a married small group, I know my wife's got my back. She'll jump in and say something every now and then too. But I feel like it's a success if I can get everybody involved. If everybody feels like they participated in the discussion with something valuable, then I think that's a huge win for having a good small group. So
very good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I think we're just going to wrap it up. I definitely appreciate all that you shared. If I can, just kind of to recap, for you guys who are new small group leaders, you don't need to be overwhelmed with all the responsibilities of leading a small group. Work with the people in your group, share responsibility, but then just make sure that you have a warm environment for people to come into. And I don't mean weather-wise. I mean, that it's friendly, that it's clean, that there's not a whole lot of distractions going on if you can avoid them. And then just do your best to make a discussion happen by asking questions that allow people to share. And again, a success is, did everybody get to participate? Did people feel warmth? Did they feel encouragement? Did you feel encouraged while you're here? That's what makes a small group, and that's what makes a small group a success, in my opinion. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys. Love y'all, and we'll see you next time.